David Dye is back with Amazing Tales number 4, and this time it's a horror issue. This week, Jason joins me to discuss the issue, which includes some very familiar names on the letters page. First, if you appreciate the work we do on this podcast, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. All patrons get our bi-weekly videos featuring 20th century TV trivia quizzes. More perks and bonus content at higher donation levels, including discussions of MCU movies and Lee Ditko Spider-Man stories. And help us meet our goals to unlock the earliest episodes of our podcast and put them all back in the feed. Pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
This is Jason.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Jason in Portland. How is everything?
Things are delightful, Tim. We finally got to the perfect season in Portland, where it's dark, gray, and rainy, and I can finally go outside and enjoy nature.
Well, at least it's not blazing hot.
No, the summers are too long here. I moved here to get away from people with tans, you know? Like, tan people are the worst. They don't know how to drive or do anything. No offense to any of your tan listeners.
Well, my friend in San Jose, I think, would agree with you. Not so much about tan, but about people in California. Just in general.
Yeah. No, it's finally my time of year where I can spread my wombat wings and enjoy this town. It's also good drinking weather because it gets dark so early now. You're like, fuck it. I guess it's drink. I think it's booze o'clock. In December, it's dark at like 4:30. So don't if we do a podcast in December.
Well, that's kind of like rough here because Japan is really far east in its time zone, so the sun comes up super early and goes down super early compared to America, and there's no daylight saving time here, so even in the summer it's dark by 7:30.
We have really short days in the winter. Like, the sun doesn't come up to like 9 or 10, and then it's down by 4 or 4:30 because we're really high up.
Yeah, you're further north than I am.
Yeah, science. No one tunes into this to get science from me. We're here to talk about comics.
Yeah, I guess come to think of it, isn't Portland about the same latitude as Minneapolis? So that makes a lot of sense. Anyway,
I couldn't tell you. I do love the replacements though. That all tracks.
Okay, so we've got a comic. This is from our friend David Dye, who Mulele and I interviewed a while back, and I think we've reviewed every issue of his Amazing Tales series.
Can you give some background on what Amazing Tales is? I'm coming into this with issue 4.
Right. So this is the first time I can recall seeing him do a horror issue. The others have been kind of like other genres. I mean, and he does work in his military characters in this, but in a completely different tone of story than we've seen in the past. But sometimes it's like things that are kind of semi-autobiographical, or it's just kind of whatever he feels like doing, I think. They have tended to be maybe adventure or a little bit weird, like, Twilight Zone or something. But, in this issue 4, he goes full-on horror. The cover says Chiller in dripping letters. And so I was looking back at issue 3, in which, just like issue 4, he apologizes for it taking so long to come up with the next issue. But, so the third issue was all in color. And this one is all in black and white except the cover. And comparing them, I think I actually like the black and white art better. because doing it all in, I assume, pencil, he does a lot of really good shading, and it has more texture than the color work did.
I'm not missing color on this at all. I think black and white works really well for
Mm-hmm.
horror, for what he's doing here.
Yeah, I imagine he did that because it was horror, but
I just feel like this was conceived in black and white. I can tell when you're looking at black and white line work that hasn't been colored, as opposed to something that was conceived and executed with the intention of being in black and white, and that's really how this feels.
mm-hmm.
Especially with that first story where it's this. I don't even it would be challenging to color this because the way it looks like it was done with a marker. I think a lot of this is done by hand, like the lettering is done by hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this first story, like I said, his military characters, I don't remember what he calls this part of the series. It's not actually mentioned on the page here, but it's continued from the previous issue, even though it's now become a horror comic. So they had been it was a little bit more of a, I don't know, political story last time, but yeah, now it's horror. And they're still looking for the simmies that they were after in the previous issue, but then they run into some various weird things like zombies and whatever. But I guess every once in a while
I thought it worked on its own.
Every once in a while your life turns into a horror comic, I guess. But yeah, it does work on its own. You don't really need to have read the previous issues.
I didn't know there were previous issues. If it wasn't for a footnote in this story about a previous adventure, See Amazing Tales 3, I would have thought this was a standalone adventure created for this. Mm-hmm. So I really like that idea that there's an ongoing serial and that other stories in the issue are of the same theme, the same sort of palette.
Yeah,
that's really clever.
3 stories here, and they're all horror stories. Then the other 2 are completely self-contained. I don't think they tie in with anything in past issues.
No.
Yeah, and again, I really liked the art here. I thought it really worked, maybe the best I've seen of his work at all. I would not blame him if he kept doing comics this way, even if they were meant to be comedy. Because especially that first story with all the shading, the texture, I really like. The second story is more straight black and white. Mm-hmm. And the third story also, just the first one has that texture to it. But yeah, I really like the look of that art. My only complaint, I think, about the first one is I felt like the end of the story, the last line, it wasn't really a satisfying way to end it. The other stories I thought ended better. This one is just like, well, yeah, he had a virus, the end. And I needed a little bit more of a zinger, I think, to end the story.
I'm in total agreement with you that these stories work in that sort of Tales from the Crypt, dramatic irony ending. And I liked all of it, but then her last line of the piece, I feel like that could have used a little bit more time in the oven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was growing in his body like a virus, a bloody big virus. I was like, well, it doesn't quite land. Maybe it's a cultural difference, but I thought it was good. I thought it was great. But that ending was a little bit didn't quite.
Yeah, it needed a little more of a twist.
Right.
Like a little bit, kind of a reference back to something in the story or something that's a little, maybe not exactly funny, but like ironic, something like that.
You would want to call back to something earlier to let the audience know we've gone on a journey and the cycle is complete, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, remember when this happened, and then you remind the audience how far you've gone when you end. Where this, honestly, my only complaint is that line doesn't really work.
Yeah.
But I feel like maybe there was another line, or sometimes you will just struggle with a line and you have a placeholder, and I leave a note for myself and I write something snappy here later. And then it's time to go to press, and you just grasp at something. There isn't that sort of send off, that snappy send off that the other ones have.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a continuing story, and maybe I'll give a little bit more leeway on that one.
But yeah, I think he's looking at the other two stories and kind of how they end and so forth. I think he really does grasp how to do this kind of story, how to do a horror story that, yeah, like you said, Tales of the Crypt has a little kind of weird humor to it.
Mm-hmm.
So
broad characters.
mm-hmm.
The other two stories, I think I love just maybe even more. Even though the art style is different, but they do have these little short, self-contained. I'm thinking Tales from the Crypt. I'm also thinking Creep Show, the original Creep Show movie, with these little morality tales, with these really broad genre, these broad characters, and these little genre pieces. And there's a lot, they go pretty much how you expect them to go once you get all the pieces. There's like a little surprise here or there.
Uh-huh.
But I feel like he does a really good job of nailing the dialogue of those pieces. They're not meant to be Hemingway-esque, right? They're not meant to be Kierkegaard and or Albert Camus, but he really dials into this genre really well. So there's like a creepy boat captain taking these two honeymooners, this same-sex honeymooners, down the swamp, and in the very first, it's not a spoiler to say that he's a werewolf. He's thinking about being a werewolf as he's like going down the river with them. I'm gonna read this to you because this could be terrible dialogue, or it could be the best dialogue for this piece. At this time of the month, I risk having one of my turns, but they've paid twice the normal rate. How could I refuse? Like, on its surface, that's like really heavy exposition, but it's perfect. It really gets the audience up to speed. Now like there's this ticking clock in the background that he's going to turn into a werewolf, and the story subverts that a little bit. And he's also like a really his inner dialogue watching the two female partners. I have to read this to you too because it's so over the top and ridiculous. Honeymoon, Jesus, a pair of bloody lezzos. What a flaming waste of good talent. No, when someone says that in a story, they're not coming to a good end. So I just love it. I love the character work. It's not trying to talk about social issues in our time. These stories, like if I handed you these stories out of context of being contacted by the creator, what year do you think these were made in?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, this second story does have some nudity in it that would definitely not be Comics Code approved. But, of course, I guess in the EC days, almost anything went. I don't know. I mean, it could have almost been a 1950s or 50s story, or like maybe an underground comic that came out in 1969 or...
Yeah, I got a real like a Richard Corbin vibe from the second and the third story. I get an 80s indie comics that I would buy, like not Faust, but I'm trying to think what Richard Corbin's 80s work was. Yeah, I really love it. I think it really taps in. It's a timeless genre. It's sort of refreshing to read. Short, self-contained little horror pieces that are really, really tight. Like story-wise, are tight. I don't want to say they're like the best thing I ever read, but I'm saying like to work in this genre and to do it this way and this well, I think is commendable. Like they're sitting around a campfire singing "Kumbaya." Like, come on, it's ridiculous.
There's no like modern technology. I mean, nobody has a smartphone that we can see, right. So that also kind of makes it feel timeless. Like it could have come out decades ago.
Yeah. See, I don't want to give too much away in the second one because it has some nice turns. But he also brings in a legend of and I will probably mispronounce this, the Bunyip. an Australian
Sounds
legend,
good.
which I googled, and I googled it. It's a real thing. It was at one point it was reported in the papers in the 1850s about people that had killed a bunyip. So yeah, it's a fun little monster tale. Really well done. The art it does feel like an EC comic, like it is of that ilk.
Mm-hmm.
Well done. I don't think color would enhance this at all. Just the opposite.
Yeah. It needs to be black and white. Yeah, even if he doesn't do all the textured shading. Coming up, The Curse of the Mummy, and some names on the letters page that listeners to this podcast will know very well. Don't forget you can help to unlock classic early episodes of Deconstructing Comics, help me return all the old episodes to this podcast feed, get videos of my brother Paul and me discussing 20th century TV trivia, and at the $4 level get access to hours of additional full-length podcasts. At the $10 level, you can review the book of your choice with me here on this show. Support Deconstructing Comics and our other shows at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or you can send a one-time donation via PayPal to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Are you Batman? Oh, you must be, because that's Robin. Hi, Robin.
Yes, Batman and Robin are here, and Tim and Paul are also here to evaluate the Batman TV show that took the nation by storm in 1966.
How in the name of purple wombats do they manage that?
To the Bat Polls podcast looks at the writing, the music, the guest stars, how the show fit into its times, and much more. Look for it wherever you get podcasts or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. Why, listening to the Bat Polls even makes Season 3 enjoyable.
Gosh, yes, Batman. When you put it that way.
And number 3, did you want to move on to number 3?
Sure.
The third story in this? Curse of the Mummy is probably my favorite.
Okay.
And it opens with this great splash page of this girl named Sal, and she's talking to her friend Brad, and she's like, "Come on, Brad, let's have a look at this." And she points at a museum, and like just the pose and the characters, and it honestly feels like such a great 80s indie comic piece. It does feel like a setup for a Tales from the Crypt. But I think their relationship is sort of interesting and fun. And it's I don't know how long it is, 8-10 pages, but for the real estate it has, I think it really has a good economical pace and a good payoff, and it's just charming.
Yeah, well, that splash page is very horror setup. I mean, who goes to see a Treasures of Egypt traveling exhibition at a museum in the dead of night? It's like cloudy, partly cloudy, and then there's the full moon above that, and it looks like
I will tell you who it is.
It looks
I have
like
the answer to your question.
Midnight.
A girl in a schoolgirl outfit. A girl in a plaid schoolgirl's like. That's who goes in there. That and her male friend Brad. Yeah, you don't want to think about it too much. Yeah, he messes with the mummy, and of course there is a price to pay. And there's a fun little twist. And I actually like the way that he writes the female characters in this. All the stories are driven by strong female characters, which brings me to probably one of my favorite parts of the book. The letter page.
Yeah, which I had not read before we started recording, and you pointed out some things to me about the letter page.
Yeah, so I am somewhat sensitive to. I work at a liberal art. When I'm looking at work, I have a different sort of eye for content. And honestly, I thought this was fine. There's nothing in here that would have jumped out to me as something that like I couldn't show my students, or I wouldn't, share without reservation. So I didn't read the first 3 issues, but people got opinions. People have very, very strong opinions, social opinions. Let's see. Peggy Legg writes, I see you haven't changed your art style yet. Still grossly sexist, humiliating the women. The image on page 10 is a clear reference to a sexual act. This sort of thing may excite animals and perverts. Clean up your act before I report you. Again, I don't like. What year is this? Like, Peggy, what century are you writing from? There was.
I
there
must complain
was,
in the
like,
strongest possible terms, like out of Monty Python.
I mean, there was nudity, but there was nothing graphic or sexual or like erotic about this.
Hmm.
And I don't find that he. I mean, I see, superhero comics with more salacious intent than anything in here. This is not John Byrne's She-Hulk graphic novel of the 80s. Let me tell you.
But then he paraphrases some things that Mulele and I said on Critiquing Comics when we talked about issue 3. And of course, Mulele is still, I think, a fan of Dave's overall, but he didn't like the way that the Simmies, who were these kind of monkey people, were dressed as Arabs.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that feedback got to Dave because I didn't catch any of that when I saw the villains of the ongoing Martian piece. I didn't catch any. That one was not there.
Well, I'm sure Dave listened to all of our reviews, and then Mulele and I had him on Critiquing Comics after that, and I think we discussed it in that episode. I meant to go back and listen, but I didn't have time. But yeah, it was a year or two ago.
That's sort of the benefit of doing this in like little pieces, like a syndicated story, because you can make changes and you're not locked into everything. When I do a graphic novel, if I get to page 150 and I found that I've made an awful mistake, like it's too late, right? So you can sort of course correct as you're going and get feedback as you're going, and I think that's important. And like even the most well-meaning creators, we don't get everything right all the time.
Yeah.
At my advanced age, the world has changed so much. And it's what I like a lot about Dave is that he takes critique very, very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does. And yeah, the Simmies who do appear in this issue don't look like they're dressed like Arabs at all, as far as I could tell. I mean, they seem to be in sort of astronaut costumes or something. But I didn't get an Arab vibe from them at all.
Oh, so good for you, Dave. I mean, I thought all these stories were really well done. If I have any feedback, I think you just need to be more prolific. I think there is an audience for this kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and I found it charming. I would totally read a big compendium of short stories like this. Like I love horror anthologies, and it's actually probably not a bad way to work. If you want to work on an ongoing story and do like 20 pages every couple of months and then knock out some short stories on the side. No person is just one idea. Like we're storytellers. We're not one story. We're a multitude of stories. Mm-hmm. So I actually think, it makes me think, wouldn't I love to have like a Jason magazine? Where it's like, because you have so many different projects. So you get a little bit done on this one, a little bit done on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm curious. I have a lot of questions about how he gets this out and the business model for this and how you find your audience. But I thought it was really well done for what it was.
Yeah.
If I have any feedback, it's like I actually don't like that cover at all. I think the cover is probably the weakest piece of art in the whole thing.
Interesting. Why?
I would just say there's a lot of text. The top of the cover is very text heavy, and I would move some of the action in it, some of the taglines. I would move them lower and maybe cover the character's feet, as opposed to having this text like shooting out of almost like the monster. And there's this foreground element of a monster's hand approaching the lady. And when you put all that text there, it doesn't let that image breathe. And the whole point of this image is sort of the deep focus of those hands moving on a character. And it's just too crowded at the top.
Yeah, I guess I zoom out a little bit and see the whole front cover on my screen at once. It does feel kind of top heavy.
Right. So you can move that down. And then if we're going to split hairs, like I know this is not... this style of art and this style of storytelling is not really meant to be heavily scrutinized. But there were a couple of issues, I think in the Mummy story, where there's like a square room, and the perspectives shift a little bit. They're not the perspective, the scaled perspective of like the museum. Those walls are kind of wonky. Like just the art teacher in me. If you look at that museum, like the left wall shifts a little bit. I notice when there's a female character standing outside his window, I think on page 36, page 32, the wall looks like it's going to fall on her. It looks like the wall is like leaning at like a 30-degree angle towards her. And his depth of field is pretty shallow. So, and I applaud him for mixing up the camera angles and perspectives. But my only feedback is just be more wary of your, like, look at the last panel on page 32. That window is not quite a rectangle. It's leaning forward. The kid is too shallow in the image. Little things like that. It's really hair splitting. And for this genre, I don't really think it matters.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're critiquing comics. If there's anything I can tell Dave to improve upon, it would just be that. And perspective is hard.
Yeah. Okay.
But I do love these gray. The first one is done in a gray wash, and I love it. I just think it really sets a tone and a mood, and it makes me want to read. When I first opened this, I was like, I don't know about this. But then once I read this story, I was like, oh no, this is perfect. Actually, we keep flashing to like these monsters' eyes, and as a narrative device, where it's leading is actually very, very clever. So yeah, if you think that EC Comics, Tales from the Dark Side might be your jam, I would recommend this. I was really happy that I read it. You know who's gonna? I'm gonna send this over to my friend Tony Talbert, my illustrator I work with. He would love this. Actually, he really would.
Okay.
Tony will do the same thing. Tony will color some of his pencils and inks with a marker, and then we have to scan them right away because the dye fades so quick.
Okay.
Yeah, I love this old school. I just love. I can't tell what year it was made either.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah. Good work, Dave.
Okay. So
are we rating them? What do we agree on? Do we thumbs up? Are we giving them like a letter grade, an A, or?
I don't know, but way back in the early days of critiquing comics, Mulele and I used to give ratings, and then somebody suggested that maybe we didn't need to give ratings, or that it kind of didn't work, so we stopped giving ratings. Okay. But yeah, I would say thumbs up on it for sure.
Yeah, thumbs up. Good job. And don't stop. I would just do more, Dave. I would just continue. I think the ongoing narrative padded with standalone stories gives you a lot of room to explore, a lot of room for creativity. It's more interesting for a reader. If like you don't like one story, maybe you'll like the other two. It's more variety. And yeah, I'm just happy someone's doing something like this, because there's no way this makes money, right?
It's comics, of course it doesn't make money.
No, but I mean, like, this really probably doesn't make money.
Yeah.
Like, you really have to make an anthology work, but like an indie anthology, that's one person's indie anthology. Like, that's, not a recipe for famous. For everyone is sort of like chasing IPs. Like, I want this to be option for it to be a movie. This is like unabashed love of horror comics, and I think that's great. I don't see a whole lot of that anymore. Everybody wants a Netflix show. Dave, you are never getting a Netflix show, and you know it. I know you know it. Bless your heart. Don't stop. And where can I buy these books?
I believe that he does have a website, which I will link to, and he sells them there.
Yeah, because when someone like this person is sacrificing their life to make comics, you know what I mean? Like this is a passion project, and I think stuff like that needs to be supported, because if we don't keep Dave off the street, Dave might come to your street, on my street,
or Zombie Dave.
Yeah, and based on his imagination, we don't want him leaving the house. We want this guy inside making comics.
Or maybe Dave is a werewolf. I don't think so, but never can tell. Okay, so listeners, if you would like us to critique your comics, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read it and talk about it on the show. So thanks for listening, and thank you, Jason.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
Check the show notes for the link to buy David Dye's comics. You can help Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and all our podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is from bensound.com. Next Wednesday on Deconstructing Comics, Will Weaver and I look at the second coming of Mark Russell and Richard Pace's Second Coming. The second 6-issue series from Ahoy Comics ended earlier this month. How does it stack up against Volume 1? Be sure to listen next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.